Welcome to the First Player Token Podcast, a short podcast for folks who enjoy playing board games with family and friends. I'm your host, Derek Bruff. In this episode, I have another family board game recommendation, Love Letter. A few years ago, I was visiting some friends who like to play board games about as much as I do. We didn't have much time to play, so my friend brought out this little 16-card game called Love Letter. I thought, how much fun can you have with a game consisting of just 16 cards? The answer, as I learned, was a lot of fun. In Love Letter, a 2 to 4 player game designed by Seiji Kanai, players are trying to get their love letter to the princess. Each of the 16 cards in the game represents some member of the royal court, the prince, the king, a handmaid, a guard, and so on. Each card is numbered from 1 to 8, with the higher numbers representing court members closer to the princess. For instance, the guard is a 1, the handmaid is a 4, the king is a 6, and the princess herself is the 8. Each card also has an ability that activates when the card is played. More on that in a minute. To play, you shuffle the deck and pass out one card to each player, which they keep hidden from other players. On each player's turn, they draw one card from the deck, and then play one of the 2 cards in their hands. At the end of the round, the player with the highest numbered card left in their hand wins the round, because they managed to get their love letter to the court member closest to the princess, maybe even in the hands of the princess herself. Often, however, you don't make it that far in a round, because players can get knocked out of a round early, depending on the cards that get played. And if you're the last player still in, you win the round. For instance, if you play the Baron, a 3, you pick another player to compare hands with. Whichever player has the lower card is out of the round. If you don't have a high card in your hand, that might sound risky, but not if you had previously played the Priest, the 2, which lets you look at another player's hand. Knowing or deducing what other players have is a key part of the strategy in Love Letter, since there are several ways you can use your cards to knock another player out of the round. For instance, 5 of the cards in the deck are guards. When you play a guard, you select another player and call out a number between 2 and 8. If they have that number in their hand, they're caught and they're out of the round. You may not know for sure what another player has in their hand, but you can often narrow down the range of possibilities. Maybe they just knocked another player out with their Baron, and the player that lost had a 4, the handmaid. Now you know that the player who played the Baron has at least a 5 in their hand, and if the 5 has already been played, and you have a 6 in your hand, that leaves just the 7 or the 8. Now would be a great time to get a guard, because you've got a 50-50 shot of knocking that player out by guessing the right number. Love Letter is a fun game of deduction, with just a bit of card counting. There are only 16 cards, and the ones that get played stay face up on the table. Players might get knocked out of a round early, which can be frustrating for some kids, but each round plays quickly, and everyone is back in at the start of the next round. To win the game, you have to win a certain number of rounds depending on how many you're playing, and it gets really tight at the end. When one player takes the lead, the other players usually start to team up on that player. If you can knock someone out with your guard or your Baron, wouldn't you pick the player who's about to win? This means that the game usually has a pretty exciting conclusion, with 2 or more players about to win before a decisive final round. This also keeps the game competitive for younger players who can team up on older players. Love Letter is rated for ages 10 and up, but we play with our 6-year-old. There's a bit of reading required, but with only 16 cards in the base game, it's pretty easy to memorize what each of the cards do. And the deduction aspect of the game provides some nice practice and logical thinking. Love Letter is one of my most played games, and all my kids and their cousins love it. In fact, why don't we hear from one of those cousins right now? Here's the First Player Token Royal Postage Reporter, my 11-year-old niece. Can you tell me about the time we played Love Letter on the way to our ski trip?
We were driving to the ski trip, but we weren't stopping anywhere, so we played Love Letter until like forever.
Like, how many hours do you think we played Love Letter on that trip?
Like 10 hours.
Like 10 hours. No, there's a lot of hours all the way to Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we stayed up very late.
Yes.
We played in the car, right? Like we had to have like a pillow in between us to put the cards down.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was a lot of fun. That was epic.
Yes.
Epic Games of Love Letter. Now, what do you like? What do you like about this game?
I like how it's like kind of short and it doesn't take forever, so you can play multiple rounds. And I also like how it's kind of like you're like, oh, what happens next and stuff.
Yeah. What do you think about this cast of characters here? Do you have a favorite?
I like the handmaid because she like protects you, and it just feels really good that she's just guarding you.
There's never the wrong move to play the handmaid.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
See? Love Letter comes highly recommended. I actually caught my older daughters playing it in their bedroom well after bedtime one night. They had snuck it upstairs when I wasn't looking. The theme of the game is fun, with a colorful cast of characters whose abilities match their role in the court. For instance, the Countess is a 7, very close to the Princess. But if you have the Countess in your hand, with the Prince or the King, you have to discard the Countess. Why? Well, I like to think it's because the Prince and the King don't approve of her as a friend, so when they come around, she has to make herself scarce. I'm also pretty happy that the guards in the game are all female. That has played well with my strong independent daughters, and it helps balance what could be a very gendered game. The handmaid is in fact one of the best cards to play, since she prevents you from being targeted by other players until it's your turn again. We usually announce that play by saying, "Talk to the handmaid." I will note that in the version of the game we have, both the Princess and the Countess could, as my kids like to say, use a shawl. I'm not 100% happy with the art for that reason. That said, there are lots of different versions of Love Letter. I have the 16-card version that Alderac Entertainment Group published in 2012. Mine came in a little red bag, a comforting velvety bag, as the girls call it. Love Letter was so popular that Alderac released other versions with different themes. There's Love Letter Batman, in which Batman is trying to catch the Joker. There's Love Letter Wedding Edition, in which the princess is wearing a wedding dress, presumably a game you might give as a wedding gift or as a wedding favor. My favorite is Letters to Santa, featuring Santa Claus, Mrs. Claus, elves, gingerbread men, reindeer, and a rather adorable Krampus. In 2019, the license moved over to Z-Man Games. They released a new edition that adds 2 new characters to the base game, a Chancellor and a Spy, and it allows for up to 6 players, with 21 cards total. It's a little bigger game, but still pretty small. And the all-new art by Andrew Bosley adds some nice diversity to the game, in both ethnicity and body type. None of the female characters in this version need a shawl. This is probably the version of the game I would recommend, given the more inclusive art and the higher player count. That's it for this episode of the First Player Token podcast. See the show notes for a link to my website, where you can find past episodes and see photos of Love Letter. For more board game photos, follow me on Instagram, where I'm at First Player Token. On Twitter, I'm also at First Player Token, but without the E in player. I've been your host, Derek Bruff. Thanks for listening. Now it's time to play some games.